We helped Earth when nobody else wanted to. Only later did we understand how humans show their G. The Zelkai, an ancient and peaceful race from the distant planet Volter, had long observed Earth from afar. Their society, driven by peace and the pursuit of knowledge, had spent centuries learning about the vast array of planets in the galaxy. Yet, they had never once interfered with the affairs of other species. That was, until Earth came into their view. A small, blue planet on the edge of a galaxy filled with turmoil. It was not the beauty of the planet that drew the Zelkai's attention, nor its rich biodiversity. It was the signal, an urgent distress call that echoed through the void of space, carrying the voices of desperate humans who were on the brink of extinction. The Banshrak, a ruthless alien species, had arrived and begun their invasion of Earth. With their advanced weaponry, they quickly overwhelmed the human defenses. Earth was on the brink of collapse, its cities in ruins, its military forces scattered. Humanity had fought bravely but was being pushed to the edge of annihilation. At first, the Zelkai were hesitant. They had always maintained a policy of non-interference, believing that the natural course of a species' development should remain undisturbed. However, as the Banshrak's hold over the planet grew stronger, something stirred within the Zelkai, a deep, unspoken sense of duty. They could not, in good conscience, allow such suffering to continue without intervening. After much deliberation, the Zelkai Council made a decision. They would aid Earth, but only on their own terms. They would provide their advanced technology, medical aid, and military support, but they would not engage directly in the war unless absolutely necessary. The Zelkai knew that the human spirit, while bruised and battered, was resilient, and they hoped that the humans themselves would rise to the challenge if given the right tools. When the Zelkai fleet arrived in Earth's atmosphere, they did not land with fanfare or spectacle. Their ships, sleek and elegant, hovered above the major cities, their presence barely noticeable against the backdrop of the sky. They sent a simple transmission to the world's leaders, offering their assistance. There was no grand proclamation of alliance or victory. The Zelkai made no demands, they simply asked for permission to help. Humanity's response was immediate but divided. Some governments were skeptical, wondering if the Zelkai had ulterior motives. Others, desperate for any chance of survival, accepted the offer without question. The military command, weary and desperate, was eager to hear what the Zelkai could provide. Yet there was a fear deep within the human leaders, a fear of trusting an alien species, no matter how noble they seemed. In a series of high-stakes meetings, the Zelkai presented their technology to the humans. They offered weapons of incredible power, capable of turning the tide against the Banshrak. They shared medical knowledge that could heal wounds and illnesses faster than human doctors ever thought possible. They also provided blueprints for energy shields that could protect entire cities from the Banshrak's devastating bombardments. But the humans were not easily convinced. They knew the Zelkai's help came at a cost, though they did not know what that cost might be. They did not know if the Zelkai would ask for something in return or if they had some hidden agenda. Still, with the Banshrak growing ever more powerful, they agreed to accept the Zelkai's help, albeit with caution. And so began the partnership between Earth and the Zelkai. At first, everything went smoothly. The Zelkai's technology proved to be as advanced as promised. Humans learned quickly how to integrate the new weapons into their own military forces. The shields worked as promised, and cities began to rebuild under the protection of the alien technology. The Banshrak, at first confident of their imminent victory, soon found themselves facing fierce resistance. The war that had seemed all but lost for humanity suddenly turned into a struggle, one that the Zelkai hoped would give humans the chance to reclaim their planet. Yet, as the battle raged on, the Zelkai began to notice something odd. While the human soldiers fought with determination, it was not their technology that won the day, it was their spirit. Time and again, the humans threw themselves into battle with a kind of intensity that seemed impossible. They fought not for themselves, but for each other. Their unity, their shared desire to protect their homes and loved ones, was what truly turned the tide. The Zelkai were astonished by this. Their own species, peaceful and logical, could not comprehend the depth of human emotion, nor the power that came from it. The Zelkai watched in awe as a group of human soldiers, outnumbered and outgunned, held off a much larger Banshrak force. These soldiers fought not for glory or personal gain, but for something much deeper, a shared sense of duty to their fellow humans. The Zelkai could not understand why they would fight to the last man, even when retreat was an option. But the humans did not retreat. They pressed on, unyielding despite the odds. One Zelkai commander, a seasoned warrior named Alorith, decided to learn more about this strange behavior. He made contact with a human soldier, a man named John Cartwright, who had survived several battles and witnessed the destruction of his own hometown. Alorith asked him why he fought with such desperation, even when it seemed hopeless. John looked at him, his eyes tired but steady, and replied, "We don't fight because we think we can win, we fight because we have to. We fight for the ones we love, for the ones who can't fight anymore. We fight because if we don't, who will?" Alorith was stunned. He had never heard such words before. In his culture, the idea of sacrificing oneself for others was foreign. His people valued logic, reason, and peace. But what John said made sense in a way that Alorith could not explain. The human spirit, it seemed, was not bound by logic or reason. It was something more, a force that transcended the material world. The Zelkai began to study the human way of life more closely. They observed how, even in the darkest hours, humans found ways to connect with one another. They witnessed acts of kindness, selflessness, and courage that defied all logic. It was as if, in the face of overwhelming odds, humans became stronger, not in spite of their suffering, but because of it. Despite their technological superiority, the Zelkai were humbled. They realized that while they could offer weapons and shields, it was the humans who possessed the true strength, the strength of will, of heart, and of unity. The Zelkai had believed that their technology would be the key to victory, but they were wrong. It was the human spirit that would ultimately save Earth. As the Banshrak retreated, the Zelkai stood in silence, watching the humans continue their struggle. The battle was far from over, but the Zelkai had learned something that would stay with them forever. That there was something powerful and unquantifiable within humanity, a force that no technology could replicate, no weapon could destroy. The Zelkai did not know what it was, but they knew it was something they could never underestimate again. As the war between Earth and the Banshrak continued, a strange but undeniable change began to take place. The Zelkai watched, silently at first, then with increasing fascination, as humans displayed a level of unity and resilience that was beyond their understanding. Their planet was being destroyed, their cities bombed, and yet humanity did not falter. Instead, they found strength in their desperation, a strength that was raw, unpredictable, and frighteningly powerful. The Zelkai had initially believed that their advanced technology, their superior knowledge, and their decades of peaceful exploration across the galaxy would be enough to tip the scales of war. But even as they delivered wave after wave of weaponry and supplies to Earth, they noticed something peculiar. The human soldiers were not simply relying on the alien technology. It was not the weapons that gave them the edge. It was something else. It was the way they fought, how they continued to push forward even when all seemed lost, when the odds were too high to overcome. When the Banshrak unleashed their most devastating attack on a human base, it was not the Zelkai's technology that turned the tide. It was the humans who refused to yield. They fought not because they had a superior force or better weapons, but because they had something the Zelkai could not grasp: an unbreakable will, a deep connection to one another, and an unwavering sense of duty to protect those they loved. The Zelkai did not know what to make of this. They had witnessed many wars in the galaxy, but they had never encountered a species so emotional. They were used to logic, to reason, to decisions made based on cold, hard facts. But humans did not think like that. They fought with something far more dangerous: their hearts. One day, during a particularly brutal clash between the humans and the Banshrak, a Zelkai commander named Alorith found himself standing on the outskirts of a battlefield. He had come to observe, to try to understand this strange force that seemed to propel humanity forward. As he watched the human soldiers rally around their fallen comrades, he felt something stir within him, a feeling he had never quite experienced before. It was a mixture of respect, awe, and confusion. He had seen warriors fight for honor and glory, but this was different. The humans were fighting not for personal gain, but for each other. He watched as a young human woman, no older than 20, picked up a fallen weapon and charged toward an advancing Banshrak force, her face determined but filled with grief. It was not the weapon in her hands that made her a threat to the Banshrak. It was the fierce determination in her eyes, the way she fought with everything she had. Her comrades followed her, each of them fighting with a similar fire. It was as if they were willing to sacrifice everything for one another to protect the people beside them. Alorith had to know more. He could not understand this. His people fought for peace, for balance, for logic. But these humans, these fragile beings, were willing to throw everything away in a desperate attempt to protect what they loved. It was illogical. It was dangerous. And yet it was beautiful. Days later, Alorith met a human soldier named John Cartwright. He had been wounded in battle, his body battered and broken, but his spirit was unyielding. Alorith had heard stories of Cartwright, of how he had fought through nearly impossible odds to save his fellow soldiers, how he had never once thought of himself, but only of those around him. Alorith could not fathom how a being could live with such selflessness, and so he sought out John, hoping to gain some understanding. The meeting between them was brief but powerful. Alorith approached Cartwright in a medical tent where the soldier was being tended to by a Zelkai medic. The human was grimacing, but there was a faint smile on his face as he spoke to his comrades. "I'll be fine," he said, his voice raspy from exhaustion. "You just get the others back in the fight. We still have work to do." Alorith stood nearby, watching the soldier. John noticed him and raised an eyebrow. "You're the alien, aren't you?" John asked, his voice thick with the weariness of battle. "Yes," Alorith replied, his voice calm. "I am Alorith. I have been observing your people. Your behavior is unlike any I have encountered before." John chuckled softly, wincing from the pain in his side. "Yeah, well, we're a bit different from most other species, I guess. But if you're asking why we keep fighting, why we don't just give up, it's simple. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone who's been lost, for everyone who needs us. If we stop fighting, then they'll die. And that's not something we're willing to accept." Alorith was silent for a moment. "But you fight, even when the battle is lost, when the enemy is too powerful. Why?" John's eyes met Alorith's, and for a moment the two stood there, locked in a silent understanding. "Because if we don't fight," John said softly, "then what are we? Just another species that gave up. Another species that let the darkness take everything away. I won't let that happen. None of us will." Alorith had no answer to that. The Zelkai were peaceful, logical, driven by intellect. They had never understood the kind of sacrifice that John was talking about. To them, peace could be achieved through understanding, through negotiation. But what John spoke of was different. It was not about peace at all. It was about survival. It was about fighting for what mattered, even if it meant losing everything in the process. The Zelkai began to study humans more closely after that encounter. They saw how, despite the overwhelming odds, humans continued to fight. They did not retreat when the enemy came with greater numbers or more powerful weapons. They stood their ground. Even in the face of death, humans refused to give up. It was a kind of bravery that Alorith had never seen before. But it wasn't just about bravery. It was about something more profound. The Zelkai could feel it, in the way the humans interacted with one another, in the way they stood by their comrades, no matter the cost. There was something in the human spirit that transcended all logic, all reason. It was a bond, a connection that was not easily broken. As the war raged on, the Zelkai found themselves increasingly drawn to humanity. They had come to Earth to assist in the fight, to provide the tools necessary to defeat the Bantrak. But now they were learning from the humans in ways they had never expected. The Zelkai saw how humans could be both fragile and incredibly strong, how they could endure great suffering without breaking. They began to realize that it was not the Zelkai's advanced technology that would save Earth. It was the humans themselves, their strength, their unity, their unrelenting will to survive. The Zelkai had once believed that victory could only come through superior technology and advanced weaponry. But as they watched the humans fight, they came to understand something else entirely. That true strength did not lie in weapons or technology, but in the hearts of those who refused to give up, no matter the cost. As the war entered its most critical phase, the Zelkai were no longer just observers. They were allies, standing beside humanity in their fight against the Bantrak. They had come to Earth to offer their help, but they had gained something far more valuable in return, an understanding of the human spirit, something that no technology could replicate or replace. The Zelkai had always valued peace, but they now knew that peace was not something that could be achieved by logic alone. It was something that had to be fought for, something that required sacrifice, bravery, and, most of all, heart. The war between humanity and the Banshrak had reached its most intense phase. The Banshrak, once confident in their technological superiority, were now facing an unexpected challenge. The Zelkai had brought their advanced weaponry and shields, but it was the human spirit that had begun to shift the tide of battle. The invaders, once unstoppable, now found themselves fighting not just against advanced technology, but against an enemy that refused to break. Alorith, the Zelkai commander, stood silently on the battlefield, watching as humans continued to rally in the face of overwhelming odds. The battlefield was littered with debris from both sides, wrecked vehicles, shattered buildings, and the remnants of countless skirmishes. Yet despite the devastation, the humans did not retreat. They fought on, as if their very survival depended on it. The Zelkai had come to Earth with one goal: to help humanity defeat the Banshrak and protect the planet. But in the months that had followed, they had learned something unexpected. It was not the Zelkai's advanced technology or superior tactics that were turning the tide. It was the humans themselves. The way they fought, the way they refused to give up, even when all seemed lost, this was what truly made the difference. Alorith had seen the humans' determination firsthand. He had witnessed their bravery, their sacrifice, and their unyielding will. Time and again, they had faced impossible odds, and each time they found a way to keep going. Even when their weapons failed, even when their cities were reduced to rubble, the humans continued to fight. It was a level of resilience that Alorith had never encountered before. The Zelkai had always prided themselves on their logical, peaceful nature. Their society had been built on reason, on understanding, and on balance. They believed that conflict could be avoided through diplomacy, that problems could be solved through mutual cooperation. But the humans, they were different. They fought not out of logic, but out of something far deeper, a primal instinct to protect those they loved, to preserve their way of life, no matter the cost. Alorith had spent countless hours observing the humans, trying to understand what made them tick. He had learned that their resilience came from more than just a desire to survive. It came from their connections to one another, from their bonds with their families, their friends, and their fellow soldiers. Humanity's strength was not in their technology, but in their ability to endure, to fight together, and to never give up. One of the most striking examples of this came during a particularly brutal battle near the outskirts of what was once New York City. The humans had set up a defensive position, but the Banshrak were pushing forward with everything they had. The Zelkai had offered their assistance, but the humans had refused. "We can handle this," they had said, their voices filled with a quiet confidence that left Alorith both impressed and perplexed. The battle raged for hours. The humans fought with every ounce of strength they had, their weapons blazing as they held the line against the Banshrak. Alorith watched as a young human soldier, barely out of his teens, threw himself into the fray, charging at the enemy with a weapon that seemed far too heavy for his small frame. He was cut down within moments, but another soldier rushed to his side, dragging him to safety and continuing the fight as if nothing had happened. This cycle repeated itself over and over again. One soldier would fall, and another would take their place without hesitation. It was as if the humans were fueled by something that the Zelkai could not understand, something that went beyond reason, beyond strategy. Later that day, Alorith approached a group of human soldiers who had survived the battle. They were huddled together, tending to their wounded comrades, their faces grim but determined. Alorith had seen their kind before, soldiers who had been through hell and come out the other side, stronger for it. But these humans, they were different. They did not seem broken by the horrors they had witnessed. Instead, they seemed to draw strength from each other, from the knowledge that they were not alone in this fight. One of the soldiers, a woman named Sarah, looked up as Alorith approached. She was covered in dirt and blood, her face streaked with grime, but there was a calmness in her eyes that Alorith had never seen before. "You came to help us," she said, her voice tired but steady. "But we've been fighting this war long before you got here. We didn't need saving. We needed someone to fight alongside us." Alorith was taken aback by her words. He had expected gratitude, perhaps even admiration, but Sarah did not speak with the awe that many other species had when they spoke to the Zelkai. Instead, she spoke as an equal, someone who had been fighting not for victory but for survival. "We fight because we have to," Sarah continued. Because if we stop, we lose everything. If we stop fighting, the Banshrak win, and we can't let that happen. Not after everything we've lost. Alorith felt a strange sensation in his chest, something he could not explain. He had never felt this way before. He had always thought of peace as the ultimate goal, but these humans, they fought not for peace, but for something more personal. They fought for their families, for their homes, for the very essence of what it meant to be human. As Sarah spoke, Alorith's mind raced. He had been trained to think of battles as contests of strength, as games of strategy. The stronger force would always win. But here on Earth, he saw something that defied logic. It was not strength that won battles, it was the will to fight, the unyielding desire to protect what mattered most. Alorith realized with a shock that the Zelkai had underestimated the humans. They had come to Earth with the belief that they were the superior species, that their technology and wisdom would be enough to tip the scales. But what they had failed to see was the power of the human spirit. It was something they could not replicate with technology, something they could not explain with logic. It was the force that kept humanity going, even when all seemed lost. The next few days were a blur of intense fighting. The Banshrak launched wave after wave of attacks, but the humans continued to stand their ground. They were exhausted, many of them wounded, but they did not retreat. They did not give up. Every time the Banshrak seemed to gain the upper hand, the humans found a way to fight back. Alorith watched as the humans adapted, as they learned to use the Zelkai technology in ways that the Zelkai themselves had not anticipated. They were quick learners, resourceful in ways that the Zelkai could not have predicted. They had taken the technology and made it their own, finding new ways to use it in the heat of battle. But it wasn't just the technology that made them strong. It was their ability to work together, to support each other in ways that Alorith had never seen before. One day, as Alorith stood on the outskirts of a human stronghold, watching as they fought to hold back a final wave of Banshrak forces, he felt something stir inside him. It was a feeling he could not name, a deep sense of respect for these humans who had shown him something he could never have imagined. They were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for each other. And in that moment, Alorith realized that the true strength of humanity lay not in their technology, but in their ability to come together to face impossible odds and to fight until the very end. The Zelkai had come to Earth to help, but now they found themselves learning from the humans. They had witnessed the incredible power of the human spirit, and they realized that this was the greatest gift the humans had to offer. The Zelkai had always believed in peace, but they now understood that peace was not always the answer. Sometimes, peace had to be fought for. And so, Alorith and the Zelkai stood with the humans, not as their saviors, but as their allies. They had come to Earth to help, but in the end, it was the humans who had shown them the true meaning of strength. The war seemed to stretch on endlessly, but there was a shift in the air, a subtle change that no one could ignore. The Banshrak, who had once been so sure of their inevitable victory, were beginning to falter. The humans, despite their limited resources and overwhelming losses, had continued to fight with a spirit that no enemy could break. The Zelkai, once hesitant observers, had now become active allies. But as the battle raged on, a new realization settled deep within them. It wasn't just about the technology, the weapons, or the strategies. The true strength of humanity was something deeper, a strength that was not built on logic, but on something far more powerful, gratitude. The Zelkai had always been a species driven by reason. They understood diplomacy, they valued balance, and they believed that peace was the ultimate goal. For them, helping another species was something to be done out of a sense of duty, not emotional attachment. They had offered their advanced technology and their wisdom to the humans without expecting anything in return. It had been a simple exchange of aid, a one-sided gesture of goodwill, or so they thought. But as the war drew to a close and the Banshrak retreated from Earth, something unexpected began to happen. The humans, who had suffered so much, were not just grateful in the way that the Zelkai had anticipated. They were showing their gratitude in ways that were unlike anything the Zelkai had ever encountered. At first, the Zelkai didn't understand. They had seen humans thank them with words, of course, expressing their appreciation for the Zelkai's assistance in the war. But there was something more. It wasn't just words, it was something deeper, something that transcended simple thanks. It was an expression of gratitude that could not be contained in a mere sentence. It was something woven into their actions, something that came from their hearts. One day, after the final battle had been won, the Zelkai were summoned to a gathering in what had once been a city square in New York. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and burnt rubble, a reminder of the destruction that had come before. Yet despite the devastation, there was a feeling of hope, a sense that humanity had survived, that they had emerged victorious not just because of the Zelkai's help, but because of their own strength. When the Zelkai arrived, they found that they were not alone. Hundreds of human soldiers, medics, and civilians had gathered. At first, Alorith, the Zelkai commander, believed it was another ceremony, a simple expression of thanks. But as he looked around at the faces of the humans, he saw something more. They were not just standing in a crowd. They were standing together, their faces solemn but filled with a quiet resolve. As the humans began to speak, Alorith realized that this was not just a ceremony, it was something much more profound. Sarah, the human soldier who had once explained to him the meaning of their fight, stepped forward. Her face was tired, and her eyes held the weight of everything she had seen, but there was a warmth in her gaze. She looked at Alorith and the other Zelkai and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "You came to us when we had nothing left. You offered us your technology, your weapons, and your help when we were on the verge of defeat. But it wasn't just that. It was the way you stood by us, the way you fought beside us. You didn't do it because you had to, you did it because you cared, and we'll never forget that." Alorith felt something stir deep inside him. Gratitude was a concept he had understood, of course. It was a polite expression, a formal acknowledgement of help given. But what Sarah spoke of went far beyond that. This was not just gratitude. This was a bond, an unspoken connection between two species who had fought side by side, who had shared in each other's pain and triumphs. Sarah paused, her voice thick with emotion. "We may have fought this war, but we did it together. And we want you to know that we'll never forget what you've done for us. You've given us more than just weapons or technology. You've given us hope. You've given us a future. And that's something no one can take away." The crowd was silent as Sarah spoke. There was no applause, no cheering, just a deep, reverent silence that spoke volumes. Then, one by one, the humans stepped forward. They did not offer grand speeches or elaborate thanks. Instead, they simply extended their hands to the Zelkai, one by one, in a gesture of solidarity and respect. Alorith, who had always prided himself on understanding logic and reason, found himself at a loss for words. The humans, who had once seemed so foreign to him, now felt familiar. They had shown him something he could not explain, something beyond strategy, beyond technology, beyond war. They had shown him the power of gratitude, not just as a word, but as a force that could bind people together. For the first time, Alorith understood what it meant to be part of something bigger than himself. It was not about victory or defeat. It was about the connections that were made along the way, the bonds that were formed in the midst of struggle. The humans had not just accepted the Zelkai's help, they had made it their own. They had taken the Zelkai's technology and woven it into the fabric of their own fight, using it not just to win the war, but to preserve their humanity. As the ceremony continued, Alorith felt a deep sense of gratitude stir within him, something he had never known before. He had come to Earth to help, but it was the humans who had given him a gift far greater than anything he could have imagined. They had shown him the true meaning of gratitude, not just as an exchange, but as a way of life, a way of living in connection with others, no matter the circumstances. Later that evening, Alorith sat alone on the edge of a destroyed building, looking out at the horizon. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the city. It was a peaceful moment, a brief respite after the long, hard struggle. But as he sat there, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed inside him. He had always believed that the path to peace was through reason, through negotiation, through balance. But now he understood that peace could also be achieved through something else, through the willingness to fight for each other, through the willingness to stand side by side, even when the odds were against you. The humans had taught him that sometimes the greatest strength lay not in the power of your weapons or the might of your armies, but in your ability to care for those around you. As the stars began to appear in the sky, Alorith stood and turned back toward the humans. They had already begun to rebuild, to pick up the pieces of their shattered world. They had lost so much, but they had gained something even more important, a sense of unity, a sense of shared purpose that no enemy could ever destroy. The Zelkai had come to Earth as strangers, offering their help from a place of logic and reason. But they were leaving as something more: allies, friends, and perhaps most importantly, students. They had learned from the humans in ways they had never expected. The war was over and Earth had been saved, but the lessons they had learned would stay with them forever. And as Alorith looked at the humans who had fought so valiantly, he realized something else. The future was theirs. The Zelkai had come to Earth to help, but in the end, it was the humans who had shown them the true meaning of strength, of gratitude, and of hope. The days following the end of the war were filled with both relief and sorrow. Earth was scarred, its cities reduced to rubble, and its people grieving the loss of so many. Yet amidst the wreckage, there was a sense of renewal, a quiet determination to rebuild and start anew. The Zelkai had stayed, offering their technology, knowledge, and support to help humanity recover from the war. But as the humans began to rebuild their world, they did so not just with the assistance of the Zelkai, but with the lessons they had learned during the conflict. The Zelkai, for their part, had stayed longer than they had originally planned. At first, they had intended to leave once the Banshrak had been driven from the planet, their mission complete. But the humans had asked them to stay, to help them rebuild not just their cities, but their sense of unity. The Zelkai had never encountered a species like this, so resilient, so determined, and so capable of coming together in the face of unimaginable loss. One of the first things the Zelkai noticed was how the humans, despite their grief, began to work together. There was no division between soldiers and civilians, between the powerful and the weak. Everyone worked side by side, rebuilding homes, clearing the streets of rubble, and comforting one another. It was a sight that left the Zelkai both stunned and deeply moved. The humans did not just survive the war, they had come together as one, as a single, united force. They had done what no invader, no enemy could ever have imagined. They had preserved their humanity. Alorith, the Zelkai commander, found himself visiting human communities more and more often. He had come to respect them deeply, not just for their courage in battle, but for their kindness and their willingness to help each other. He had seen them at their worst in the heat of the war when everything seemed lost. But now he saw them at their best, rebuilding what had been destroyed, not just in the world but within themselves. He had never known a species like this. The Zelkai had always prided themselves on their ability to remain calm, to act logically, and to avoid unnecessary conflict. But these humans, they had faced destruction and chaos, and yet they had found a way to rise above it. They had faced the worst, and now they were determined to create something better, something stronger. One evening, as Alorith watched a group of human workers clearing debris from what had once been a bustling market, he was struck by a thought. The humans had not just survived the war, they had changed because of it. They had become something more. The Zelkai had come to help, to offer their advanced technology and their wisdom. But the humans had given them something in return, something that was more valuable than any weapon or piece of technology. They had shown the Zelkai the power of community, of connection, of the ability to overcome the greatest of challenges by working together. It was a lesson that Alorith would never forget. As the months passed, the Zelkai began to understand something that they had never fully grasped before. They had always believed that peace could be achieved through reason, through diplomacy, through balance. They had come to Earth with the belief that they could solve the humans' problems by providing them with their superior technology. But the more they saw, the more they realized that peace was not just about diplomacy. It was about unity, about the strength that came from working together, from sharing a common purpose. The Zelkai had been wrong. It was not their technology or their wisdom that had won the war. It was the humans themselves. It was their unbreakable will, their refusal to give up, and their ability to come together in the face of unimaginable odds. The Zelkai had thought that they were the ones teaching the humans, but in the end, it was the humans who had taught them. One day, as Alorith was walking through a newly rebuilt neighborhood, he encountered Sarah, the human soldier who had been one of the first to welcome the Zelkai to Earth. She was standing in front of a group of children, her face tired but smiling as she watched them play. The war was over, but the scars it had left on Earth were still visible. Yet Sarah, like so many others, had found a way to move forward. "How are they doing?" Alorith asked, nodding toward the children. Sarah smiled, her eyes softening as she watched them. "They're starting to heal," she said quietly. The world has been through a lot, but we're going to be okay. We're stronger than we were before. Alorith was silent for a moment, watching the children as they ran and played, their laughter ringing through the air. They were the future of Earth, the next generation who would carry the weight of what had happened before them. And yet, they were laughing, playing, growing up in a world that had been torn apart and was now being rebuilt. "I've learned a lot from you, Sarah," Alorith said, his voice quiet. "From all of you, you've shown me that strength doesn't just come from technology or logic. It comes from something deeper, something that cannot be measured. It comes from your hearts." Sarah's smile faded slightly as she turned to face him. "We don't have anything else," she said softly. "We've lost so much, but we still have each other, and as long as we have that, we have everything." Alorith nodded, understanding. It was a sentiment that he had never fully understood until now. He had come to Earth to offer help, to provide what he thought would be the key to victory. But what he had found was something far more powerful. The humans, despite their flaws and their struggles, had something that no invader, no force in the universe could ever take away. They had each other, and in that they had everything. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden light over the city, Alorith realized that it was time for him and the Zelkai to leave. Their mission on Earth had been completed. The war was over. The humans were rebuilding. It was time for them to return to their own world, to their own people. But Alorith knew that he would never forget what he had learned on Earth. He had come here to help, but in the end, it was the humans who had helped him. They had shown him that strength was not just about power, but about connection, about the bonds that held people together, even in the darkest of times. The Zelkai had come to Earth to give, but in the end, they had received more than they could have ever imagined. They had received the gift of understanding, of seeing what true strength looked like. As the Zelkai fleet prepared to leave, Alorith stood on the edge of a rebuilt city, watching the humans below. They were not perfect, far from it, but they were alive and they were together. And that, Alorith realized, was the greatest victory of all. With one final glance at the world they had fought so hard to save, Alorith and the Zelkai took to the stars, leaving behind a world that had changed them forever. And as they left Earth behind, they carried with them a new understanding of what it meant to be strong, to be human, and to never give up.